The German Empire, built by Bismarck through the defeat of France in the War of 1870–71, would transform the balance of power in Europe. The foundations of a new state had been laid, but in doing so, the existing European order was placed under grave threat. From that point forward, nearly all of Bismarck's actions and initiatives were devoted to one goal: preserving the unity he had created. The only real danger to the new empire came from the other European powers themselves. Bismarck fully understood that the emergence of the German Empire had fundamentally altered the continental equilibrium, and that Europe's great powers would not easily accept this new reality. For this reason, he was careful never to extend German policy beyond Europe unless absolutely necessary. Bismarck knew that in the fragile early years of the empire, any new war on the continent could shake the foundations of German unity. Strengthening that unity would take time, and until it was secure, another major European conflict, especially one involving Germany itself, would be extraordinarily dangerous. The Chancellor was a shrewd statesman. He realized that France, humiliated by its crushing defeat, would never easily accept its loss. Germany had taken from them Alsace and Lorraine, two territories rich in industry and emotion. For the French, recovering those provinces would become a sacred cause. Even at the Versailles Assembly, convened to approve France's new republican regime after the peace, the mood was one of bitterness. Between 1871 and 1875, in school books, political speeches, and popular literature, French nationalism dominated everything. Bismarck's greatest fear, therefore, was that France might one day launch a war of revenge. Such a conflict, unlike the one in 1871, would not be watched passively by the rest of Europe. Other powers could easily intervene, and the outcome would be unpredictable and possibly disastrous for Germany. The German General Staff, however, thought differently. To them, the logical course was to strike first. They argued that before France could rebuild its army and seek revenge, Germany should launch a preventive war, crushing France once and for all. But Bismarck rejected the idea every time it was raised. As long as he held power, he declared, no preventive war would be fought. He knew that in a second war against France, the other European powers would not stand idle, and that such a conflict could easily spiral into catastrophe. For this reason, Bismarck became a tireless advocate of peace after 1871. Once again, his political genius went to work. France's revenge had to be prevented not through violence, but through diplomacy. Having seen Germany's strength in 1871, France would not dare to fight alone. Therefore, if France could be isolated, it would avoid war. But how was Germany to construct an anti-French alliance? Bismarck began with Austria. Despite the humiliating defeat of 1866, he understood that Austria would be indispensable to his long-term plans. He therefore treated Vienna with deliberate courtesy and restraint. This rapprochement also suited Austria's needs. For all its efforts, Austria had failed to prevent the unification of both Germany and Italy. It now needed to find a new sphere of influence, a new center of gravity. Standing before the Habsburgs, who now cast their gaze upon the Balkans, was a formidable rival, the Romanov Empire. Seeking to drive the Ottoman Empire out of the region and to unite the Balkan Slavs under its leadership, Russia had embraced the policy of pan-Slavism, and in this region, it was already a power to be reckoned with. On one side stood Austria-Hungary, eager to expand southward into the Balkans. On the other, Tsarist Russia, steadily extending its influence there. The Balkans, that ever-boiling cauldron of European history, was once again beginning to spark the flames of a coming inferno. If Austria-Hungary were to grow in the region, it would have to crush pan-Slavism, still in its formative stage. Yet the strongest element of pan-Slavism was Serbia, and Russia, the protector and patron of the Serbs, would never allow such a blow. Thus, without German support, the Habsburgs' task would be nearly impossible. Against the Pan-Slavic bloc, there had to be formed a Pan-Germanic bloc. The possibility of France forming an alliance with newly unified Italy did not trouble Bismarck in the least. That left only two major powers of concern: Britain and Russia. But Britain, embroiled in disputes with France over the Egyptian question, was in no position to enter into any alliance with Paris. For Germany, the true danger lay in the east, in Russia, the vast empire of the Romanovs, rich in population, land, and ambition. The worst possible scenario for Germany would be a Franco-Russian alliance. Should France and Russia unite against her, Germany would find herself trapped between two fronts, east and west. Thus, the seeds of Germany's most fateful dilemma, the two-front war, were already being sown. This possibility, the union of France and Russia, became Bismarck's greatest fear. So much so that in later years, it will be remembered as Bismarck's nightmare. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871 also marked a decisive turning point in Russian foreign policy. Following its crushing defeat in the Crimean War, Russia had been forced by the Treaty of Paris, 1856, to withdraw from the Black Sea. The harshest clause of that treaty declared the demilitarization of the Black Sea, forbidding Russia to maintain either a navy or shipyards there. This struck a devastating blow to Russia's maritime power and freed the inland seas from the specter of Russian dominance. From 1856 onward, Russia sought every opportunity to overturn these humiliating restrictions. The powers that had driven Russia out of the Black Sea were Britain, France, and Austria. Yet both France and Austria, at various times, considered relaxing these constraints when it suited their interests. Still, Tsar Alexander II hesitated. He judged that the time and the circumstances were not yet right, but the Franco-Prussian War changed everything. One of Russia's main obstacles to revising the Treaty of Paris, France, had suffered a catastrophic defeat at Metz, overturning the balance of power in Europe. That French collapse removed the Tsar's last doubts. On October 31st, 1870, Russia issued a note to the signatory powers of the Paris Treaty. In his message to the European governments, Foreign Minister Alexander Gorchakov wrote, "His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor of Russia, no longer regards himself as bound by the obligations which limit his sovereign rights in the Black Sea." Bismarck, however, was displeased. The siege of Paris was still ongoing, and he did not want Russia taking unilateral action that could disrupt the fragile European balance. He therefore proposed that the issue be settled through an international conference. The meeting was held in London, beginning in January 1871 and concluding in March. The result was the Treaty of London, which effectively restored Russia's right to maintain a fleet and fortifications in the Black Sea. Russia had achieved its goal, and in doing so, signaled that new storms were gathering on Europe's horizon. This situation forced Germany in a single, clear direction. To preserve peace, Russia and Austria had to stand alongside Germany, not against her. The first step in that structure would become known as Dreikaiserbund, the First League of the Three Emperors. Despite defeating Austria in 1866, Bismarck had carefully avoided humiliating her, allowing mutual respect to survive. Between 1871 and 1872, reciprocal visits between Emperor Franz Joseph and Kaiser Wilhelm I fostered a spirit of rapprochement between the two Germanic powers. For Russia, however, this growing understanding between Vienna and Berlin was alarming. The unity of the Germanic empires threatened to undermine Russian ambitions in the Balkans. So what was Russia to do? The Balkan nations had not yet broken away from Ottoman rule, making the dream of pan-Slavic unity still distant. The only other option seemed an alliance with France, but France, broken and humiliated, was in no condition to be a useful partner. The only major power remaining in Europe outside this new system was Britain. Although Britain viewed with unease the rise of a newly unified and rapidly ascendant Germany, it had its own problems with Russia. After its defeat in the Crimean War, Russia began expanding southward from the Caspian Sea into Central Asia, conquering Turkic Khanates and pressing toward Afghanistan and India. The Tsar's empire also dreamed of extending its influence into Persia, placing it dangerously close to Britain's most prized possession, India. Having been humiliated in the Crimea and denied a naval presence in the Black Sea, Russia could not hope for an alliance with Britain, the very power that had once played Europe's arbiter. By the early 1870s, the Russian Empire stood isolated. To escape this isolation and regain diplomatic weight, the Tsarist regime sought closer ties with the pan-German bloc. Bismarck's long-cherished dream was thus beginning to materialize. In 1873, the emperors of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia met to discuss Europe's political future. Although no formal treaty emerged from the meeting, the three powers agreed to pursue a common policy in Europe. Germany had successfully drawn Russia into its orbit, leaving France completely isolated. Yet this alliance, like so many in history, was doomed from the start. The Three Emperors League would collapse at the first tremor, during the crisis that history remembers as the Eastern Crisis. The 19th century was the century of Balkan uprisings. What began as a modest Serbian revolt would prove a harbinger of dark days for the Ottoman Empire. The Greek War of Independence had already drawn Europe into the region's turmoil, and by the 1870s, the situation had become even more volatile. Encouraged by European support, Balkan nations sought to break away from the Ottoman state and establish their own kingdoms. And now, they found the perfect opportunity. The Ottoman treasury, burdened by the foreign debts accumulated since the Crimean War, was thrown into chaos when a severe drought struck in the early 1870s. To compensate, the government increased taxes in other provinces, a move that proved disastrous in the Balkans, where unrest was already simmering like a powder keg. The final spark was struck in 1875 when an uprising broke out in Herzegovina, supported by Russia. At that time, Sultan Abdelaziz made a crucial mistake. Influenced by the Russian ambassador Ignatieff, he appointed Mahmud Nedim Pasha as Grand Vizier, a man so pro-Russian that he earned the nickname Nedimov. Convinced that the Herzegovina affair could be settled within a week, Nedim Pasha underestimated the crisis and only deepened it. Not only did he fail to suppress the rebellion, but he also allowed it to spread. Despite the Ottoman army's efforts, the revolt escalated beyond control. The inability to restore order invited foreign intervention. The Three Emperors League stepped in, drafting a joint note known as the Andrassy Note, named after Austrian Foreign Minister Gyula Andrassy. The proposal sought to pacify the region by granting limited rights to local populations, but the rebels rejected it outright. Early in 1876, a Bulgarian uprising followed, plunging the Balkans into chaos. With Russian encouragement, Serbia and Montenegro declared war on the Ottoman Empire in July 1876. Confident of an easy victory, Tsar Alexander II sent General Mikhail Chernihiv to command the Serbian army. This move alarmed Austria-Hungary. If the Slavs won, Russian dominance in the Balkans would be inevitable. Aware of this tension, Russia sought to reassure Vienna. Under Kaiser Wilhelm's mediation, Tsar Alexander II, Emperor Franz Joseph met and reached an informal understanding, the Reichstadt Agreement. They agreed that, in the event of a Serbian or Montenegrin victory, the post-war settlement would be decided jointly, and that if war broke out between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, Austria would remain neutral. However, since the understanding was never put in writing, it later became the source of serious disputes between the two empires. The agreement assumed that the Ottomans would be swiftly defeated, but the opposite occurred. Though the Montenegrins scored some early successes, they could not sustain them, and the Serbs suffered crushing defeats. Two states that had counted on the sick man of Europe being an easy foe were now utterly routed. The Serbs, facing annihilation, sued for an armistice. The Ottoman Empire, confident after its victories, sought harsh terms that would permanently cripple Serbia. But the European powers, viewing this as arrogance, turned against the Porte. Public outrage also flared across Europe over the Bulgarian massacres, which were reported with horror in the Western press. Russia seized the opportunity, pressuring the Ottomans to accept a ceasefire under threat of intervention. Reluctantly, the Ottomans agreed. When the Serbs resumed hostilities, this time under Russian protection, they were again defeated. The European powers, alarmed by the instability, decided to intervene diplomatically and convened an international conference in Istanbul. On December 23, 1876, as the Istanbul Conference opened in the Ministry of the Navy building at the Golden Horn, the delegates heard cannon fire from outside. The Ottoman Foreign Minister, Safet Pasha, explained its meaning. The Sultan had just proclaimed a constitutional monarchy. The Ottoman Empire was now to be governed by a constitution and a parliament, limiting the Sultan's absolute power. In theory, the empire's diverse peoples, including the Balkan Christians, could now express their demands through the parliament. From the Ottoman point of view, this made the conference's proposed minority reforms unnecessary. But the European delegates were unimpressed. They viewed the new constitution as a last-minute ploy and greeted it not with admiration, but with cold indifference. During the Istanbul Conference, even Britain, long considered the Ottoman Empire's lifeline against Russia, took a stance against the Porte. The resolutions adopted there were devastating for the Ottomans. The borders of Serbia and Montenegro were to be expanded. Bosnia and Herzegovina were to become autonomous provinces, whose governors would be appointed with the approval of the European powers. These provinces would maintain local militias, and 1/3 of their taxes would be spent locally. Bulgaria would be divided into two provinces, Eastern and Western Bulgaria, each governed by a Christian administrator. The same model of autonomy proposed for Bosnia and Herzegovina would apply to Bulgaria as well. Furthermore, all reforms in these regions would be carried out under the supervision of international commissions composed of representatives of the great powers. For a sovereign state, these terms were intolerable. Lord Salisbury worked tirelessly to persuade the Ottomans to accept them, even submitting a detailed memorandum to Sultan Abdul Hamid II. He warned that rejecting the proposals would mean war with Russia, that the Ottoman Empire would stand utterly alone, and that it would be attacked from all sides and ultimately partitioned. Nevertheless, the Ottoman government refused the conference's demands. The conference had revealed to all of Europe the full extent of Russia's expansionist ambitions. It became clear that restraining the Tsarist Empire was no longer possible. The Three Emperors League, tested by its first real crisis, began to fracture. Austria-Hungary, realizing it could not halt Russia's advance, sought at least to slow it through compromise. Bismarck, striving to preserve the League, supported this conciliatory approach between Vienna and St. Petersburg. Before the conference dissolved, the two powers reached an understanding on the 15th of January 1877, known as the Budapest Convention. According to the agreement that was signed, Austria would take control of Bosnia and Herzegovina, while in return, Russia would be given freedom of action in the Balkans. Yet, this freedom came with one crucial condition: no single, large Slavic state was to be established in the region. However, even as the two powers put their signatures on the agreement, they had absolutely no trust in one another. The European powers gathered in London and, on March 31st, 1877, presented the Ottoman Empire with a set of conditions similar to those they had proposed at the Conference of Istanbul, demanding their acceptance. If these terms were rejected, nothing more could be done. Indeed, when they were rejected, one of the bloodiest wars in Turkish history would erupt. Having rebuilt his army after the Crimean War, Tsar Alexander now reaped the rewards. Over the course of a year, the Russians inflicted catastrophic defeats on the Ottoman forces. Facing collapse, the Ottoman Empire appealed for aid to its former Crimean allies, but this time none would come. Each power acted only in its own interest. The Russian commander-in-chief, Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, declared confidently, "Nothing can stand before us. I've received the order to march on Constantinople, and march I shall. With God's blessing, the Russian eagle will soon be fixed upon the walls of Tsargrad." As Russian troops approached Adrianople on the 22nd of January 1878, the Ottomans requested an armistice. The Tsar's terms were severe, sparking intense debate in Istanbul. Panic spread. With the capital's fall seeming imminent, officials discussed relocating the government to Gallipoli, Anatolia, even Egypt. In this climate of despair, the Armistice of Adrianople was signed. The Ottoman army would withdraw to the Turkos Line, 5 kilometers ahead of which Russian troops would be stationed, separated by a neutral zone. The news caused outrage in Britain and Austria-Hungary. The sight of Russian forces so near to Istanbul alarmed Europe. Britain even considered dispatching a fleet to the Bosporus. But Sultan Abdul Hamid, fearing to provoke Russia further and prolong the war, refused permission. Peace was signed at San Stefano, just outside Istanbul. The resulting treaty stripped the Ottoman Empire of nearly all its Balkan territories. Most alarming to the other powers was the creation of a Greater Bulgaria, an enormous Slavic state under Russian influence. Austria-Hungary, seeking to expand its own presence in the Balkans, opposed the plan. Britain objected to Russia's approach toward the Aegean and Mediterranean, while Germany, wary of alienating Austria, viewed a stronger Russia as a strategic threat. Under mounting international pressure, Russia reluctantly agreed to revise the treaty at a new Congress in Berlin. Presided over by Bismarck, the Congress of Berlin became a major test for the Three Emperors League. Bismarck, claiming to act as honest broker, struggled to maintain balance between Franz Joseph and Alexander II, whose interests clashed in the Balkans. In the end, however, Bismarck had little choice but to favor the Germanic Austrians over the Slavic Russians. Under the Berlin settlement, Bulgaria's borders were drastically reduced from the vast area granted at San Stefano. Eastern Rumelia, Western Thrace, and Macedonia were separated from Bulgaria. Eastern Rumelia and Macedonia were returned to Ottoman control, nominally under reforms supervised by Europe. Bulgaria itself was confined between the Danube River and the Balkan Mountains. The new arrangement satisfied both Britain and Austria, ensuring that Bulgaria remained landlocked and far from the Aegean. At first glance, the Ottoman Empire, which lost large portions of territory, seemed the greatest loser. But the true loser was Russia. Having won a brilliant military victory, it lost most of its gains at the negotiating table. The War of 1877 to 1878 ushered in a new era for Europe. The Berlin settlement created new tensions that would, in time, lead the world into total war. The growing conflict between Austrian and Russian ambitions forced Germany to make a choice. it could not side with both. Naturally, the Germans aligned with Austria-Hungary, and in 1879, the two powers signed a defensive alliance. Each pledged mutual assistance in the event of a Russian or French attack. This dual alliance was, in a sense, a preview of the coalitions that would clash in the Great Cataclysm 35 years later. Yet even after the 1879 alliance, Bismarck had not entirely abandoned Russia. The possibility of a Franco-Russian alliance, uniting his two greatest fears, continued to haunt him. Determined to prevent such a partnership, he sought to restore the goodwill lost at Berlin. The 1879 treaty was defensive in nature and did not preclude further cooperation with Russia. Bismarck even warned Vienna against provoking new tensions with St. Petersburg. Meanwhile, Russia, embittered by its treatment at Berlin, also felt betrayed by Britain. London had not only helped curb Russian expansion, but had launched new policies, anticipating the Ottoman Empire's eventual collapse. Supporting nationalist movements within the empire, championing the Armenian question, and securing control of Cyprus to counter Russian influence in the eastern Mediterranean. Britain also reaffirmed the closed status of the Straits, blocking any future Russian access to the Mediterranean. The result was renewed Russian isolation, and once again, the Tsar turned to Berlin. On the 18th of June 1881, the three emperors signed the Second League of the Three Emperors in the German capital. Though Bismarck had succeeded in reviving the alliance, he could not keep it alive. The fragile balance unraveled in 1885 when the divided Bulgaria rose in revolt and united. The crisis reopened the rift between Austria and Russia, this time irreparably. Realizing the alliance was doomed, Bismarck sought new ways to preserve stability. In 1887, he concluded a separate agreement with Russia, the Reinsurance Treaty, while continuing the alliance with Austria, managing both powers separately. But this balancing act came at a cost. To maintain German influence, Bismarck effectively sacrificed the Ottoman Empire, acknowledging Russia's potential control over the Straits. It was a pragmatic move. 1890 marked the turning point, the year when Europe began to shift from the scent of ink and diplomacy to the smell of gunpowder. In 1888, Kaiser Wilhelm I, the monarch who had worked in perfect harmony with Otto von Bismarck, passed away. His successor, Frederick III, reigned for barely 3 months before dying of cancer. Onto the throne now stepped a young, ambitious ruler whose personality would shape not only Germany's future, but that of all Europe. Kaiser Wilhelm II. The new Kaiser was nothing like his predecessors. His grandfather, Wilhelm I, had deep respect for Bismarck, often deferring to the Chancellor's political wisdom. But Wilhelm II had played no part in the struggles or triumphs that had forged the empire. He was proud, impulsive, and determined to rule in his own way. From the very first days of his reign, tensions between the aging Chancellor and the young monarch began to mount. Wilhelm wanted to be involved in every matter of state. Bismarck, the seasoned architect of German power, found his authority challenged by a headstrong emperor. By 1890, their relationship had completely collapsed, ostensibly over domestic policy disputes, but in truth over a deep clash of temperament and vision. Bismarck, the master of Realpolitik, believed in cautious diplomacy, restraint and balance, the careful maintenance of peace through pragmatic calculation. Wilhelm II, by contrast, envisioned a Weltpolitik, one that would project German influence and prestige across the globe. The most consequential change, however, came in foreign affairs. Under Bismarck, Germany's survival had depended on keeping Russia diplomatically contained yet friendly, preventing any possible alliance between France and Russia, the nightmare scenario that haunted the old Chancellor. Kaiser Wilhelm did not see Russia as such a great threat. The Russo-German Rheinsurance Treaty, signed in 1887 and expected to be renewed in 1890, was not renewed despite Russia's wishes. This rift between the two countries would set in motion the chain of events that paved the way to Bismarck's nightmare: Russia's eventual alignment with France